Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Sharq's English Diwan. Today we are very pleased to host Dr. Abdullah Alaoudh, Research Director at Dawn and visiting professor at the Elliott School at George Washington University. His work's previously been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Foreign Policy. And previously, Dr. Alaoudh served as Senior Fellow at the Al-Wadid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding and the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University for 2 years. He was also a postdoctoral fellow at Yale Law School and obtained his SJD and LLM from the University of Pittsburgh in comparative international law. While at Pittsburgh, he completed his dissertation on religious institutions and the influence of the ulama in post-revolutionary Arab countries. He received his BA in Islamic law from Qasim University in Saudi Arabia. Alaoudh is also co-founder of the National Assembly Party, Saudi Arabia's first openly declared political party, which calls for an elected parliament and constitutional safeguards for their country. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Alaoudh. Just before I hand the floor over to you, I will just briefly introduce the topic for the session today. So today's topic is titled The Ulama, the King and the Nation, State Transformation in the Gulf. As the region approaches 10 years since the uprisings that marked the start of the Arab Spring, the tumultuous decade has left many unanswered questions as to the future of Arab states and society. Beyond the headline-grabbing uprisings of 2011, which saw protests spread across the region in what many observers and political actors alike interpreted as a broad outcry for political change across Arab societies. The complexities of the grievances and struggles of today's citizens of Arab states, although largely unchanged from a decade ago, are better seen for their connection with day-to-day life. Although Gulf states were largely spared the social upheavals seen in other parts of the Arab world, with the exception, of course, of Bahrain, and while more general geopolitical issues still loom large, problems related to political legitimation have been persistent. This involves a range of social and political as well as economic actors, including rulers, subjects, or citizens, and a range of influential social groups such as the ulama. Today's discussion will focus on ongoing transition in Gulf states, leading to changes in the relationship between rulers and citizens, as well as the ulama and rulers, and the disruptions to decades-long legitimation processes. The discussion will also focus on the new model of the state, as well as its pitfalls. So as per usual, our structure will be a lecture or just talk for 30 to 35 minutes by Dr. Alaoudh, followed by a Q&A and discussion session. On that note, again, thank you, Dr. Alaoudh, for joining us today, and I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you everyone for coming, and thanks for inviting me for this wonderful forum and wonderful people and group and team here. Well, I'll be trying to stick to the points and topic of this talk today. Please feel free to bring me back to the main question or discussion when I divert or go other directions. As I told Mike and others just before we went live on this, that I just lost my notes, so I'll be speaking just from my head and notes that I just wrote right now. So to tackle the issue, I'm going to discuss a few things, ideas of legitimacy, the comparison between old Muslim state and new Muslim state, and then we'll go from there to the Gulf state, modern Gulf state and modern nation state in the Gulf, and how legitimacy went from one form to another, and how this can affect stability and understanding of a state in the modern understanding of the sense. Excuse me. Well, I think we should start with the idea that there is something that we can call the old Muslim state. The old Muslim state, meaning let's make it simple by calling pre-modern Muslim state, and pre-modern meaning pre-Westphalian state that usually is found in the vast majority of Muslim states. Whether there was the call it the caliphate or some smaller other states in the Muslim majority areas in the pre-modern times. And I guess one important feature of this old state is that there's that sultanic understanding of the system, where there is a conception and misconception about it. And let's start with the misconception before we go into what it is. One very widely shared, let's call it misconception about the old Muslim states, the pre-modern Muslim state or pre-modern Islamic state, is the idea that it is one form of what it is called, what is known in the literature as Oriental despotism. Oriental despotism is a concept really discussed in the literature of all states, and it is added and as the title, as the term suggests, it's from the Orient, from the East or Far East, as opposed to the West, and that's why it's called Oriental, and it is despotism. So it's a one-man rule. It is an absolute authority, as it suggests. That's the term, that's the theory. And a lot of Orientalists, especially old type Orientalists and traditional Orientalists, let's call them, read and understand old Muslim states as one form or another of this Oriental despotic states, where one man rule everything and every aspect of life, and that man had the absolute authority to do whatever he wants and can do whatever it takes to stay in power. That was the misconception, that was the theory pushed for by a lot of Orientalists, but I'm quickly going to challenge it here with a lot of other new research in the literature that try to shed light on what Oriental mean and what despotism mean and how that could not apply to the pre-modern Muslim states. And I'll just be very brief on this, because we'll just take this opportunity to go into the modern Gulf states. But before that, let's say why Oriental despotism does not apply to the old pre-modern Muslim states. One important aspect is that the Islamic state is actually, or the old Muslim state is actually ruled and constrained by rules outside the control of that man, outside the control of the caliph, outside the control of the sultan, outside the control of the ruler. And these rules, these traditions that constrain the ruler are actually not just outside of his control. He has no authority to intervene. I mean, a quick example of this is how Islamic jurisprudence developed, whether that Islamic jurisprudence in regard to economy, in regard to social life, in regard even to political and constitutional law, as we know it today. For example, you see people from various schools of thought, various schools of jurisprudence, from Hanbali, Hanafi to Shafi'i to Maliki, developing their own jurisprudence and school of thought without the control or intervention of the state, without the control or intervention of the ruler. And we have multiple examples in history where jurists actually resisted positions and resisted the desire to be part of the state and to be paid and to be given authority and to be given money and to be given positions in order to preserve jurisprudence, in order to preserve their literature and traditions. And one aspect of this is the multiple examples that you can see in Islamic history, where a lot of jurists resisted the appointment of judges, their own appointment of judges, meaning they resisted to be part of the judgeship that is appointed by the state. And you will be shocked to know that almost the majority of jurists throughout Muslim history resisted being part of the state, resisted being judges for the state, just to show that jurists want to have this independence, want to be independent from the state control, the state's influence, want to be to preserve their traditions, their jurisprudential traditions, meaning their traditions of fiqh, the development of how fiqh is understood in literature and how fiqh is developed in the literature. And we know, for example, Ash-Shafi'i was lashed because he refused to be a judge. We know Ahmad ibn Hanbal was lashed, and there is a huge literature on the event of what is called as the Inquisition or Mihna, when Ahmad ibn Hanbal was lashed because he disagreed with how Al-Ma'mun and then later Al-Mu'tasim understood not just theology but also political theology, let's call it, or let's say even jurisprudential traditions. And we know also Abu Hanifa did not just resist and refuse to be a judge. He actually, according to many reports, died because of this torture when he refused to be part of the state. And you will be shocked why with the ruler, the medieval, let's call them, just for the sake of history, medieval, but they are not medieval in the Islamic context, but actually they are these. Let's call them classical or like later classical period of Islamic history. Why would someone like Abu Hanifa go to the extent of being hurt and even dying of lashes because he refused to be a judge for the state? You would understand that from the context of not just Abu Hanifa, but all jurists and the vast majority of jurists refuse to be part of the state because they refuse that intervention of the state into the making of jurisprudence, into the making of Islamic thought. And I'll just call it Islamic thought procedurally, because we don't want to go into details difference between Islamic thought and Islamic jurisprudence. But you understand that sense of why they refuse to be part of the state, why they refuse to be judge, and the position of judgeship, because they want to preserve their own traditions. They want to protect their own literature from the political intervention. They want also to send a message to the ruler that they are constrained by the rules and traditions that the jurists themselves create and develop, not the ruler. So the ruler then is and that's why even Al-Mawardi and Al-Juwayni, who are widely thought among the political Islamic thought to be to be lenient into the ruler, they themselves said the number one and all of what the rulers would do and should do is to apply the rules that the jurists themselves developed, and just apply Islamic law, apply Sharia law, apply what has been developed by some other people, but not the rulers themselves. And that's what, I mean, for me, makes it hugely different than what we know in the old history as Oriental despotism, where you have an emperor elsewhere in the world, in the Far East, just dictating how the state should rule without any constraints from anybody other than the state itself. And that's totally different. Another aspect, another important aspect and difference in the old Muslim state, and I want to emphasize this because it's going to make a difference when we discuss the modern state, especially modern Gulf state. So the other difference and the other feature about old Muslim state is that it does not, I mean, the state itself, the ruler, the sultan, controls only almost 10% of Muslim society, control almost like very small percentage of the daily life of the individual. And that's really, really important, and it's going to matter a lot when you discuss the modern state. And how is that so? How was the ruler only able to control very small percentage of the lives of the individuals at that time? Well, take the example of education. The ruler would not control education. The pre-modern Muslim rulers would not be able to control education, because education is actually not run by them. There is no modern type of education as we know it today, is like, for example, high school, secondary school, elementary school. This system is completely modern. How would kids educate themselves? How would you send your kids to education at that time? You would send them to private libraries, private endowed libraries, meaning it's all libraries and schools at that time called madrasa, like in Arabic madrasa, right? Madrasas at that time, or katatib, or schools, it's gonna differ on how you see them and how in each city of the Muslim world at that time operated. But generally, they were a product of something called endowment, which is like awqaf as we know it in the modern age. Endowment or awqaf is completely controlled, like jurisprudentially, I mean, rule-wise, they are controlled legally by the jurists, because the jurists and fuqaha dictate how they should be run. The fuqaha tell you, and they even developed like that huge ruling, that huge tradition of what they called nadr al-awqaf, the endower, the endowment administrator. The endowment administrator, or nadr al-awqaf, or the endowment supervisor, is just somebody who is appointed by the endower, not the state. And that's a huge difference, because remember, endowment or awqaf is a private foundation, is a private project that is developed and created by private individuals, and that what makes it really different and unique in Islamic history. It is more comparable to what we know it today as private foundations or private institutions, or even civil society institutions. And that's why you see in history, people who started to understand what these awqaf are, started to say that these awqaf were actually the first examples of what we know today as civil society institutions or private institutions that were not controlled by the state, but by individuals who endow them, who make them awqaf. And whoever creates this endowment actually can dictate who supervises it and can dictate who runs it, and even the terms and conditions of how it should be run. Why I went into all details about the old Muslim schools is to show how education were actually run and controlled not by the state, but individuals who wants good for the society, and therefore the state could not control it. And even the ruling in society, the law, let's call them, most of what we know today as the law were in the Muslim, the pre-modern Muslim world, was created by the jurists as we know them today, or the fuqaha, or the ulama, or those who write and research about Islamic jurisprudence. So that's an aspect. Also, let's talk about the economy. Also, economy is never controlled by the state, and the rules and laws of economy is not even created by an apparatus of the state, but rather by independent jurists, by independent individuals, and even those what we know as embodiment or muhtasib of suq, or something you can call them like economic supervisors, are not actually were not actually appointed by the state, but rather were elected by individuals, by businessmen and businesswomen at that time, mostly businessmen, but just for the sake of the argument. So that's how it was done. And you can go on and on, not just the economy, but education, and even the military, how the military, I mean, even when the sultan or the ruler wanted, for example, to go into a war, they would urge the fuqaha, they would urge the speakers or the khutaba or khatib of the Jum'ah prayers or of the sermons to preach the people and to urge them to enlist in the army and to do that. So it's not obligated by the state. You are not obligated to the ruler. You are not you do not report to the ruler or to the politicians, but rather to your own judgment, to your own relationship, to the community, to the sheikh, imam, or khatib that you speak to and report to. So that's how it's different. That's how it is. It is clearly a misconception and misunderstanding to call any type of political any type of state in the pre-modern Muslim history as as Oriental despotism. But at the same time, we are not saying this ruler is democratic in any sense, because democracy was not developed as we know it today. But I mean, when the modern state came about, it actually realized kind of realized that the state would control every aspect of the individual's life. Meaning, the modern state now, and now as you notice that I introduced the modern state, and the discussion of that is that the modern state started to control education. As we know today, there is the modern education that we all went through in order to be educated, in order to have jobs, in order to work in our lives. We go through state-run and state-controlled education system everywhere in the world, not just in the Arab world, but everywhere in the world. That's about education and economy, about the law. The law is created by, even if it's by Congress or by Parliament or by an independent part of the state, it's still part of the state. It's still part of the state system. It's part of the setting of how this modern state works. It's a branch of government at the end. It's a branch of the state. So it's a branch, another branch. Yeah, maybe independent, maybe elected sometimes, but it is still a branch of the government. So that's the modern state. And also you go on and on and on in all aspects of life. So when people in the West and Europe specifically, and later the US and elsewhere, realize that this modern state that has taxation, that has everything, that now starts to get money from the people in order to run the state, it's going to be disastrous if they alienate people and the public, and there is nothing to counterbalance that. So that's when they started to adopt representation or democracy or some sort of political participation, meaning they want to create that balance, because now the state control every aspect of the individual life, and that is going to make people crazy. So one way to balance this and to make people part of this is exactly to make them part of this by political participation, representation, and democracy. And in order to balance that, they created this concept of representation. Why did that matter? Again, I should mention and remind you, when the old state worked, for example, in the Muslim world, it's true, yeah, one man rule, but one man rule who only ruled and controlled 10 to 15% of the lives of the individuals at that time, and therefore, even if it's a one-man rule, it's not going to affect much of the lives of the individuals. But now with the modern state that controls 90% of the lives of the individuals, now it's different. People are going to be crazy if they just live under this somebody dictating to them how to live and how to say, and they have no say over anything that control their lives. So that's how they introduced in the modern sense the idea of democracy, which is to allow people to be part of the state through election, through contribution, through representation, through civil society institutions that actually do some kind of oversight over state institutions. And that's why they allowed freedom for press and basic liberties and rights in order to balance that, and it kind of worked this way. So that's the second point here, is introducing the modern nation state, and whether we like it or not, this is part of our modern times. Now we go to our topic, which is the Gulf modern states. Well, as you know, and let's take the example of Saudi Arabia. They are mixed. It's actually when they started, when they established the first Saudi state in the 18th century, it was an alliance between the rulers and the scholars. It was kind of an attempt to revive that relationship between the state and the jurists, but in the modern sense, that would work for sometimes, but would create also a lot of problems and conceptual controversies. So that alliance was actually based on what Ibn Khaldun called as asabiyya, or group solidarity. Max Weber developed it into what he calls it ideology that actually kind of constitutes how states starts in the way that we know them. So that ideology of tawheed, and not just tawheed of al-aqidah, and the unification of creed, the creed of unification of Allah in Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, and how that developed, is actually there is another unification, which is a political unification, is to unify some parts of the Arab Peninsula into one state, into one setting, into one political system, in order to operate and apply that doctrinal unification of how Muhammad Abdul Wahhab understood theology. I hope I'm not going too theoretical in this. I'm trying to link some dots here, so please let me know if I fail. But generally, that's the how things worked. But when King Abdulaziz established the third Saudi state, he tried also to use that same group solidarity or asabiyya of trying to bring people together into one ideology in order to create this huge state. He succeeded, and he again said he is not just reviving his grandfather's state and the tribe state, but rather trying to support that creed of Muhammad Abdul Wahhab and support that ideology, and therefore he also succeeded. So that was if we borrow the term of Max Weber again, that was the ideological ground of legitimacy of that Saudi state. But when for example, Abdulaziz went, I'll just give you an example. For example, when Abdulaziz went to my region in the central province of Saudi Arabia, Al-Qasim, he tried to convince them about everything, and they were never convinced. But when he talked about religion and ideology and all that, and trying to pray freely for God, they gave up, and they agreed with him, and they agreed on the idea that he would not completely control them, but he will let them have from their own people and tribesmen, individuals, to be part of what we know as Amir, or the governor of that province. And Abdulaziz agreed for some times, but when the oil came along, a lot of things changed, and that's when a lot of people said the current system of what we know as the Gulf states today started to take another shape, which is the rentier state, a state that is completely based on the rent, meaning on oil, on and that's when you have now a literature known as the source curse, meaning a source, which is oil, natural source, that brings a curse to the society, because the state before this oil would try to negotiate with people like what Abdulaziz did to our people in Qasim, and with them, and with through negotiation and all that. But when oil was introduced, the people were not completely conscious that this oil should be shared by everybody, and it's everybody's ownership. It's not somebody's ownership. It's not just the state ownership. It's everybody. It's for everybody. So that was not part of how people understood things. So the state took advantage of that and tried to sell the idea that the state will benefit and pay for everybody in return for loyalty. So a lot of people will be loyal to the state just because the state pays them, because the state gives them jobs, because the state paves streets and build hospitals and build schools and educates them for free and pays for everything, basically, including subsidies, meaning selling oil and gas for their cars in a very cheap price, because part of it is paid by the state. That's what's called subsidy. So that's how rent worked, and a lot of people, tolerated not having basic freedoms, liberties, and all that, because they see how developed their cities have become, and also because they are paid, they have money. They don't pay the state as people do because they don't have taxes and all that. But when the Vision 2030, I know I'm being really rushed into this. It's very quickly, very brief. I'm not going into details, but we'll be so happy to discuss this during the questions and Q&As. But I'll be very brief and try to conclude, because I think my remarks are about to come to an end. So when the Vision 2030 of MBS was introduced in 2016, for example, in Saudi Arabia, and also there's a Vision 2030 elsewhere in the Gulf states, they started to introduce the idea that they are going to tax people. So there is now taxation. And also, like, with this taxation, there is no representation. Remember, like, a lot of people revolted in the West during the modern state time, because they realized that they are being taxed by the state, but they are not part of how the state is run. Meaning, they see that they pay for the state, they give money to the state, but they did not know how their money is being spent. So that's how representation was linked to taxation, because if you want to pay for the state, you want to know where your money goes and how it's being spent. So that was not the setting in the rentier state in the pre-2030 vision, when people were paid by the state, were given jobs, were given a lot of opportunities by the state in return for their own loyalty to the state. But now it's different. People are started to get taxed by the state, and taxes are being introduced, because now rent is not enough for Saudi Arabia, for example, to run the state. There are a lot of projects, a lot of things and ideas, industries, investments, and all that. And also, oil is not as used to be that central, not to Saudi Arabia, but to the world. There are alternative energies, there are a lot of competitions, and it's different. It's not in the 1930s or 40s or 50s or even 60s. So now oil is different. There are alternative energies. There are a lot of developments in this sector. So the idea that the idea of the Vision 2030 is not to be dependent on oil, not to be addicted to oil, but at the same time, they did not introduce representation. So that's part of what I call the crisis of legitimacy. You see, I went through all these things just to say, to show how crisis started and how crisis took this shape today. So this is one thing, is we are going to have, or actually we started going to have taxation without representation. That's one thing. Another thing is that, remember when they started the ideological ground for legitimacy during either Muhammad Abdul Wahab or either King Abdulaziz or other, to say that we are protecting your religion, the state is actually created to protect religion, or to be the commander in chief of protecting faith and all that, or Amir al-Mu'mineen, or Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, the guardian of the two holy mosques. So these symbolic and religious gestures started to fade, because now there is what's called a new nationalist rhetoric. in Saudi Arabia and some other states, where they give, or some people call it hyper national, or you can call it ultra national, rhetoric, where they say, oh yeah, all the state matters, Saudi Arabia is for the Saudis, we only care about Saudi Arabia. And you hear like ridiculous even statements and sentiments by people close to the state. And actually, I think it's really actually pushed for by the state, especially MBS and people close to him, ridiculous statements and sentiments that says, for example, Riyadh is more important than Jerusalem, and we only care about our borders. We don't care about outside. We can have allies from anybody. We can be allies with anybody as long as they serve our interests. And by our interests, they did not mean, for example, the interests of the people of Saudi Arabia or the interests of the people of the Gulf, but rather the interest of the one person on top of power, or two people. So that's so they changed the rhetoric, started to further away from that religious background, ideological background of legitimacy. And also they did not create a new form of legitimacy stemmed from that background. I'll just conclude with this. When Jürgen Habermas talked about grounds of legitimacy, he noted that for the states to go from one ground of legitimacy to another, the new ground of legitimacy has to be legitimized by the first form, because you cannot go with the people like for 100 years, for one whole century, talking about how the state is built on this form of legitimacy, and then out of the blue and suddenly you go to another ground of legitimacy, because this will shake society, will instabilize society, and therefore bring uprisings and a lot of controversies, and will pave the way for revolutions. In order for this to be smooth, you have to use that first old ground of legitimacy and take some concepts in order to legitimize and link it and associate it to this another form that should take place gradually, not suddenly. Second, it has to be through society, it has to be through ideological channels, it has to go through schools, it has to take generations in order to work. But this never happened, and that's why we have a crisis of legitimacy, where we are trying to go from one background to another. We're trying to replace religion with religion of the people and society to the religion of state, and we also going from the oil and rentier state that pays for everything and had subsidies and all, to a state where there's taxation without representation. I hope this helps, and please make sure to challenge me, question me, comment, add to whatever I say. I hope this is not too theoretical. If I fail to make it practical or less theoretical, please let me know and correct me.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, for that. Just a reminder to participants, so for questions, you can either pose your questions in text format in the chat window in the application. If you do have an intervention that you'd like to directly pose to Dr. Abdullah, I would encourage you to do so, and you can do so through using the raise your hand function in the application itself, and the administrators will get to you accordingly. On that note then, so I'll start us off here. Again, thank you for that really informative talk. I think I want to focus in a little bit on I think a key point that you brought up, and see if we can explore it a little bit deeper, especially as it relates to the Gulf states in particular. So I think you very rightly pointed out this this large difference between the pre-modern and the modern state, with of course the specificities to the pre-modern Islamic political body. But in general, I think we can apply that to pre-modern states versus modern states in terms of the level of reach with which the state and the government have. You mentioned education, of course, but of course there are other fields where this power permeates in ways that it was not possible, if not desirable, in the pre-modern period. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on what this means for Gulf states in particular, who, at least from one perspective, have maintained, at least superficially, a pre-modern form of governance, but at the same time, as you have rightly pointed out, have are founded as modern nation states, and in the recent past in particular have moved more in that direction with the rise of more nationalist sentiments, whether in Saudi Arabia, UAE, or other places. So I'm wondering if you can kind of expand on that point specifically as it relates to the Gulf.
Yes. Do you hear me, Mike? Okay. Yeah, because I lost you for a second. Well, that's why I think the better description of what the Saudi state, the current Saudi and Gulf states are like, not the old Muslim states, because it failed to one, to be constrained by outsiders, by outside system. Remember, in the old Muslim states, the ruler, sultan, the caliph is completely constrained by outsiders, by jurists, by scholars, by those who were trained completely outside the state system. People who were trained in schools that were product of endowments and awqaf, and jurists who were taught in mosques that are according to the Islamic jurisprudence is owned only by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So remember, see how sacred being independent is for the jurists in Islamic jurisprudence and history. So you only work and teach and get educated and trained in a place where only Allah owns, subhanahu wa ta'ala. It just gives you how important this was. And also, I mean, that's why I see that's, I mean, the modern Gulf states failed to be one old Muslim states, because they could not, in the modern setting in history, they could not let people control themselves and communities lead themselves, because that's not possible in the modern setting. But also at the same time, they failed to be to respond to the ideas and developments of the modern nation state by introducing representation and political participation and that. So that's why it's a hybrid system. They took, let's say, the worst of the old system, which is a one-man rule, and the worst of the new system, which is like a total control of every aspect of the individual in the modern sense, or the citizen in the modern sense. So that's in brief the crisis. And I think that's why they have what what's his name, like the novelist of 1984,
George Orwell.
Yes, Orwell. That's why you have the Orwellian term of double speak, when people say thing and they mean another thing, or say thing or so say one thing, they mean two different things in two contexts. For example, or also preach to different audiences two different things that are contradictory in nature. And the quick example is that when these states, for example, talk to the West, they would say, oh yeah, we have such a conservative society that is not worth being given election for, because they will just elect those conservative and very religious and zealot people that will ruin the state and everybody and ruin the system and the international community and all that. So the only way is to let us control these people and instead of going crazy and nuts in the world stage. And at the same time, when they go to the locals and to their own people, they would say, oh, these Western people want us to Westernize and wants you to change and want these people to liberalize you and to lose your religion. Just let us, protect your religion by trying to solidify our hands on power and all that. So that's why you have that kind of double speak, if you may say. I don't know if I answered your question or just rambled for a bit.
No, that's good, and we'll I think we'll come back to that, because it's this sort of issue of legitimation and this, as you pointed out, this sort of hybrid model between pre-modern and modern sort of state forms is sort of a key underlying theme here. Just want to turn to some questions that we've got in the chat box here. So this is from Yusuf. Yusuf's argument is that Saudi Arabia, in particular in the last few years, has sort of gone down a different political track, particularly by either diversifying or increasing its enemies. His question to you is, on this note, in your view, since when was the Muslim Brotherhood in particular considered as a real enemy or threat to Saudi Arabia? Of course, we know in the past that, especially during the Nasser period, that the Saudi Arabia had relationships and reached out to the Muslim Brotherhood. So the question sort of is, since when has Saudi Arabia considered a real enemy? Does it consider it a real enemy and a threat to Saudi Arabia? And what is your view on this?
Well, yeah, they consider it a real enemy, and why not? I mean, if the state, I mean, let's give it this context in order to understand why they try to antagonize the Muslim Brotherhood. And by the way, they are not against the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, only the Muslim Brotherhood. They're against any people who call for real reforms or political participation or representation, because, and they want to single out the Muslim Brotherhood because they think it's an easier target than just saying we are against our people, because the Muslim Brotherhood, one, has the capacity to mobilize. They has the largest networks in the Muslim world. They has that, and they also, a lot of segments within the Muslim Brotherhood has two elements, which is that they are modern, I mean, even more modern and moderate than the states themselves, but at the same time, they are within the society, and they come from society, and they call for reforms and call for change, at least a large segment of the Muslim Brotherhood. And therefore, and take the example of the Arab Spring, the UAE and Saudi Arabia see the Arab Spring not as people's uprising, but actually the Muslim Brotherhood uprising, because they see this as a way of the Muslim Brotherhood to maneuver and control the systems and states of Arab world, and therefore, or at least they want to portray it as such, and I tend to believe this. I tend to believe that they know it's, for example, the uprisings during the Arab Spring are not like Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood were part of course, but they are not the phenomena itself. The phenomena is people's uprising. It's spontaneous uprising because of lack of legitimacy. One thing that we talked about, like in this talk. Another thing is hardships on the people and lack of freedoms, lack of liberties, and all that. So, but they cannot. I mean, the states, these authoritarian regimes and autocrats cannot simply say, oh, we are against our people, we are against the, you know, we don't want liberties, we don't want freedoms, we cannot do reforms. That will just further delegitimize them in the eye of the public, in the eye of the West, in the eye of the international community, in the eye of everybody. So what's the easiest thing to do? Well, to pick one, to single out one element of society that is also part of the, of the attempted change, and to antagonize it, to make it, to enlarge it, and to make it in the picture as the phenomena itself instead of part of the phenomena, and therefore, make it an enemy and try to betray it in a way that serve your agenda. That's what they are doing, actually. That's why, and it's funny, I mean, especially in the Saudi context, and I keep laughing at this because it's preposterous in the Saudi context that the same people who for decades call the Muslim Brotherhood as people who are so lenient in Islam and so tolerant in Islam, and calling them too tolerant, and calling them like losing the creeds of Islam and losing creed of Aqidah to the others and to the non-Muslims, and being so lenient and so tolerant, and accusing like the Muslim Brotherhood for decades of this. That now the same people are calling the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists, and asking them to be tolerant about non-Muslims and all that. So it's just funny for a traditional and typical Wahhabi from the Salafi and the ultra Salafi, not just the Salafi, the ultra Salafi, the ultra conservative group, to call the Muslim Brotherhood terrorists or extremists, group. It's just that's part of the lack of legitimacy and the crisis of legitimacy. You have been preaching for decades about one thing, and then now it's like you completely in one, like overnight, saying the opposite. People would say either you are crazy, we don't believe you, or you totally change your position, and why would we trust you this time that you're not going to change your position again to the opposite? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sort of on a direction from that note, especially with regards to the ulama in Saudi Arabia, but elsewhere. We have a question from Abdurrahman. He's asking, do you think if there is a chance to create a class of independent ulama, given the current hegemony of the modern state? And I think here we mean the modern state writ large, not exclusive to the Gulf. Is there a way for society to reestablish this type of old independence from below, without having to necessarily engage in fights over political power?
That's a very good and complicated question that somebody like me cannot answer in one sitting, but I can try to think aloud with you. Well, as you may know, I mean, from a question, the setting of the ulama in the old, Muslim state, and how that worked and operated, and how now it's different. I still think there is a future for this. I think there is a way to constrain even the bad side of the modern state by introducing a role for ulama and for scholars that is not completely against the setting of the modern state, but actually reform it according to some positive side that we know in the old state. I know I'm making it complicated, but I'm trying. The idea is that you see the role that ulama played in the old setting of Muslim states, in pre-modern Muslim state, how they constrain the rulers, it's now it's possible that ulama and scholars and jurists play not a similar role, but rather like more a novel role that is kind of inspired by that old role that they played in the past. Meaning, there are conditions to do this. I mean, there are ways to do it. Like, one feature is to have them independent. Like these, like state-sponsored councils are a ridiculous idea. It's not working. It's bad for religion. It's bad for society. It's bad for democracy. It's bad for the people, for everybody. It's just not working. It's bad. Like having councils or council of fatwas or scholars that are sponsored by the state. Like having like Al-Azhar being controlled by the state, or having Hayat Kibar al-Ulama, or like senior scholars council in Saudi Arabia being controlled and paid for by the state and appointed by the state. It's just ridiculous. It's not working. It's bad. Having like muftis, like in some Muslim states, it's not working. Like mufti never, like in history of Islam, appointed by everybody or paid by the state. But also how are muftis, scholars are going to live freely and independently in a modern state setting where the state controls pay, controls taxation, controls everything. That's a challenge. But also there is a way to, again, to make use of the idea of endowments in Islam. But also in the modern setting, we can introduce in the modern setting an idea, not the idea, but actually the system of endowments that actually helped economically make scholars and fuqaha and ulama independent. That's another thing. A third thing is to have these ulama not part of the political agenda per se, not part of parties, for example, that compete for power, or part of branches of government, because they shouldn't be branch of government if you want them to be independent. Unless you call 3 branches of government and there is a 4th branch that is totally independent, we deal with them like we deal with the judiciary, which is like the scholastic branch, or we'll call it whatever, like the 4th branch. I know somebody called it once the 4th branch of government, or you can call it, for example, there is this constitutional framing, there is constitutional setting, but there is also a huge role for these scholars, but for this to operate, and that's the last thing that I want to point out here, is that they have to deal with the people, not with the state. And that's why it should be independent. It must be independent. It religiously must be independent. It politically must be independent. For this to work, for this theory that I'm presenting to work, they have to be independent. Not independent in a way that, for example, the Egyptian constitution and constitution did with the Al-Azhar, where they make Al-Azhar, for example, for life, or like some constraint. No, like completely independent, meaning like they interact with society directly without the mediation of the state. They can interact, they can, of course, comment on politics, absolutely part of politics, but not part of the political. There's a huge difference between being part of politics and being part of the political. Being part of politics means you are commenting on politics. You are saying your opinion on politics. You are telling people how to do things in politics. You are suggesting things in politics, but you don't have power. That's not being part of the political, meaning you do not have a political power per se. Does this make sense? You are muted. This is the 20.
There we go. There we go. That's the word. No, I think that's a good it's a good response to, as you rightly point out, quite a complicated question, especially around this idea of political participation, political parties. To what extent should religious scholars ideally be involved in that? What are the potential consequences of etc.? So I think there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot to unpack there. This, I think, leads nicely into the next question. We have a question from Talal, who's asking, where do you foresee the role of Nas, as of course a body formed in exile, which you are a part of, where do you see its role in formulating and advancing a new legitimate authority or a new conception of legitimate authority in the country? And how do you foresee this role playing out in the next, let's say, 10 years in Saudi Arabia? It's difficult to look that far ahead. Of course, things change very, very quickly, as we know from all of our experience over the last year. But I'm wondering if you can sort of shed a bit of insight into how that body which you and others have formed, and how that fits into this idea of developing either new modes of authority or new forms of authority legitimation in the kingdom.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. Well, that's why I think it's multiple parties is a must to force the system into changing, into introducing new things, into introducing this way of representation. And that's why we are not seeing this party as part of scholastic approach, or part of, for example, it's not a human rights organization that is documenting violations. While having such organizations hugely important and needed badly in our societies, generally in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Gulf, and all the Arab states. But this party is an initiative to, and that's why we call it the National Assembly Party. It's an initiative to say, well, to be national, and you are pushing for the nationalistic agenda. You are trying to be hybrid nationalist or super nationalist or ultra nationalist, call it whatever you want. Well, if you want a nationalist, you should bring the nation into the making of politics, into the decision making, into this representation. And if you are now taxing people, you should bring those people you tax into the decision making of how taxes are being spent and being paid. And that's why we came up with this initiative. And I think it's an initiative that I think it's unprecedented this way, because they brought a diverse names within the Saudi society outside, and the Saudi, we can call it the Saudi diaspora outside, into the idea of trying to push for real change that does not benefit one community or one segment of the Saudi society, or one element, one region, one sect, one ideology, but rather the nation. And that's why it's the National Assembly, that we want to bring people together for one goal.
Thank you for that, Dr. Abdullah. I'm wondering then if maybe we can close on this, is where do you see movements like NAS, but also other social actors, both within these countries and perhaps increasingly in, what we could call a diaspora, or at least people living abroad, where do you see these types of either formal organizations or even informal social categories, perhaps such as religious scholars and maybe academics and others? What do you see their role being in what is likely to be some form of transition in Gulf states as they move towards a more of a, let's say, traditional ruler to citizenship model, with, of course, the what is likely to be the end, or at least the decline of energy revenues coming in, and as you mentioned, taxation, these types of relations developing. How do you see the role of either more overtly political organizations or other social actors moving forward? And perhaps you can speak to in Saudi Arabia's case in particular, but I'm wondering if you can give us some insight into what your view is in the Gulf states in general moving forward.
I think one way is to park this lie and this irony of having a modern state that does not respond to the modern needs, and having, for example, trying to introduce the idea of nationalist, hype, but at the same time not a nationalist, not a national assembly, having this irony of trying to say only Saudi Arabia is for the Saudis, but at the same time you strip most of the Saudis from every basic right on the planet. They don't speak, they don't write, they cannot have freedom for assembly, they cannot have any basic right, basically. They are being arrested for a tweet, for a Facebook post, for an Instagram picture, for a Snapchat. I'm trying to brag now that I know all of social media applications, and Kik. And then, so it's, the idea is that they can basically arrest you for everything and anything. And they're not even responding to the idea of, citizenship. They're not even trying, while they are calling us citizens, they are treating us like what Hamd al-Ahmari once said. It's rather like residence more than citizenship. It's a residence theory. It's where they have you reside in a place. They let you, they tolerate the idea that you live with them in a place, but they're not, they do not give you or let you take rather the basic right of citizenship and what it means to be a citizen in the modern sense of the word. So you don't just, you don't vote, of course, but also you don't live freely, basically. You don't tweet. People now, just imagine, and that's the crisis. And the crazy thing about this modern world is that, and that's why it's hybrid. These states hybrid in the sense that they take the worst of the old system and the worst of the new system. And one of the worst in the new system is this technology of surveillance that is everywhere. They are taking surveillance tools from even Israel and elsewhere. And you can imagine that, for example, there are applications in Saudi Arabia now that you are not allowed to go, to most places in Saudi Arabia without downloading these applications. That is presumably check that you are negative for coronavirus, for example, something called Tabaud or Tawakkalna, like two applications, Tabaud and Tawakkalna. You have to show them that you are, you have a green light, that you are negative, right? Maybe it's, it seems simple, right? But no, for this application to work, you have to give its location. For the other location for the other application to work, you have to give it access to some of your social media accounts, believe it or not. So they would check your account, they would see and they can see your DM, for God's sake, they can see whatever you do, they can check. They can track you down because they have your location. They can know everything about you. And this is if you are not targeted in water tapping and hacking and all these other things that they also do. So they take the worst of this. But it would have been rather easier if they, instead of paying billions of dollars to PR campaign and millions of dollars for hacking and all these things, to just make peace with their own people, but they don't want to go this path. It's rather, they rather do everything in their power to stay in power and to be absolutely in control of everything of society. But the good thing, positive thing about this is, the hardest you go, the better chance that you resist such control, you resist such system, you resist such state and government, and that's why I'm optimistic despite all these bad things happening around us.